this lesson. So up to this point, we covered two of the three structures of programming, right? We touched on the sequence structure, then we went towards the repetition structure. We introduced the for next loop and the do while loop, and also nested loops, loops within loops. Now, in this lesson, we're going to cover the most intuitive of the structures, and that's the decision structure. It's the if-else statement. And we're going to use two programs to understand it. We're going to use a program to convert percent grades to letter grades. So basically, we're going to take every number, and we're going to decide is it an A, B, C, D, or F. And also, we're going to use each number, and we're going to decide whether it's an even number or an odd number. And to do that, we're going to have to introduce the keyword, the mode keyword. Okay, so let's actually start. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a module, and I'm going to call it else if. If else. And I'm going to say sub if else. Now, the one thing I want you to see here is that we have 10 numbers that we have to do this for, right? And so I'm going to take a number, and I'm going to decide whether it's an A, B, C, D, or F. And we're going to take the next number, we're going to do the same thing. And you can see that we're going to be looping, right? We're going to be repeating an action. In this case, a decision action, right? 10 times, as opposed to a previous lesson where the action that was repeated was an addition action. So the first thing I want to set up is the for next loop. So for I is equal to 1 to 10 because I have 10 numbers here. And I'm going to have next I. Now the decision I want to be, or the action I want to be repeated is a decision of whether or not that number is an A, B, C, D, or F. It's very, very simple. So I'm going to say if cells, and I'm going to call the number from here, and it's 16 plus I, and it's in the second column. If this number is less than or equal to 100, and this number, cells 16 plus I and 2, is also greater than or equal to 90, then I want to give it assigned an A. So I want to basically take cells 16 plus I, because I'm displaying it in this cell here, so 16 plus I, and now this is in column 3. And here's where there's one thing I want to introduce, is if you're going to display as what is called a string, which is a phrase, a letter, things of that sort, or a word, you have to put it between quotations. And I want to display a letter, so I'm going to say between quotations and a capital A. And now we're going to end the if. So this is how you end the if statement. Now with this program, we're going to first decide whether it's an A, then we're going to add and decide whether it's a B, all the way to an F. So actually, let the program go through all these 10 numbers and figure out if it's going to find any of them that actually fit that criteria. So let's run it. All right, perfect. So I went through the 10 numbers and I found 3 of them that fit that criteria and assigned it 3 A's here. Okay, so let's actually delete this. So the second thing I want to do is I'm going to copy this just for ease. If this condition is not met, I want to say else if. I'm going to paste that. Else if the cells are less than or equal to, and now I'm going to say 89.9 and 80, then I want to give it a B. So let's run. Okay, so perfect. So I went through all the 10 and I found that those 3 fit the first criteria and this one fit the second criteria. So let's copy this. And I'm going to do the same thing. If one of these numbers falls between 79.9 and 70, I want to assign it the letter C. And I'm going to run the code, and it found, of all the 10 numbers, I found 2 that fit that criteria, found 3 that fit the A criteria, found 1 that fit the B criteria. So we have 2 letter grades left. So I'm going to paste this here. So now if it falls between 69.9 and 60, then I want to give it a letter grade D. So let's run the code, and it found 2 that fit that criteria. Now I can do the same thing. I can copy this and I can put it down here for the f, whether it's between 59.9 and 50, but I don't have to do that actually, because if the number is not an A, B, C, or D, there's only one option left, which is an F. So I can just say else if all the above is not was not satisfied. Just put an F. It has to be an F. And I'm going to put F between quotations and a capital F. So I should expect that I have F's in these two. So I run it, yeah, perfect. So let me delete this. So if I run this entire code, it's going to run through all these numbers, and it's going to go through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different criteria to see if it meets any one of them. So if I run, and you're going to find 79 is a C, 50 is an F, 94 is an A, 85 is a B, and so on. So very, very intuitive, very, very simple. There's probably 3 things that I want to go through here. The first one is in some cases you can have just one criteria if the cells is less than or equal to 100. But in this case, I had to meet 2 criteria, right? I had to meet that is less than or equal to 100 and greater than or equal to 90 for it to be an A. So there's a case where you can have 1 criteria. There's a case where you can have 2 criteria where both have to be met, and you use the keyword AND. But there's a third situation where either one could be met, and that's where you use the keyword OR. Okay. The other thing I want to brush up on is that we use the F keyword here. We use the else if, and here the else by itself, right? And this is when you basically have 3 or more decisions to make. So let's move on to the even odd program. So it's going to be doing deciding whether it's an even odd for the 10 numbers. So you can see that we're going to have an outer loop 1 to 10, and we're going to say next I. Now here is when I tell you that here you have 3 or more decisions, here you have only 2. So we're just going to have an F statement, then an else. So before I actually read the code, there's something that is unique about an even number. If you take 2, for instance, and you divide it by 2, you're going to have the number 1 as your output. And if you take the number 3 divided by 2, you're going to have 1.5. That 0.5 is sometimes called a remainder. That decimal is a remainder. And there is a keyword here called the mode2 keyword. And what it does is it takes a number, divides it by 2. If there is no remainder, like 2 divided by 2, and it's going to display a 0, and that means we have an even number. But if it does give you a, if the number has a remainder, 3 divided by 2 will give me 1.5, 0.5 being the remainder. Then it's going to give you the number 1. So we can use this as our criteria to figure out whether or not these numbers are even or odd. So I can say if cells 16 plus I, and this is going to be in column 2, and I'm going to say mode 2 is equal to 0, which means I don't have any remainder. I'm going to say it's an even. So cells, in this case, I have 16 plus I, but now we're on column 4, and I'm going to say even. And again, since it's a word, I'm going to have to put it in quotations. And since I have only 2 decisions, if that's not true, it has to be one possible outcome left. I'm going to copy this just for ease, and I will change this to odd. And then I'm going to close my F statement by saying end F. Let's see if this works. All right, perfect. So we have 79 as an odd, we have 55 an odd, 98 an even, and so on. So you can see the code worked. But there's one more thing I want to show you, is that what if a mode is 1? If the mode 2 is 1, that means there's a remainder, which means this will give me an odd number. And if it's not an odd number, that's an even number. So I just want to show you that it actually works whether you put the criteria mode 2 is equal to 0 or 1. So it should give us the same exact output. Alright, so 79 odd, 50 even, so give us the same exact output. So what did we cover in this lesson? In this lesson we covered the decision structure, one of the most intuitive of all the structures, we wrote two programs, one to convert percent grades to letter grades, and we found that here we had 3 or more decisions to make, right? Because we have 4 letter grades, and we used the F keyword, F then else, but we also had to use the else if, since we're dealing with 3 or more. And for the final decision, we used else. We also went through that there are 3 ways that you can use the FL statement. You can either have 1 criteria, or you can either have 2 criteria that both need to be met, and you would use the keyword and, or either or could be met, and you would use the keyword or here. We've written another program to decide whether it's an even or an odd, and we introduced the keyword mode 2, and basically it takes a number and it divides it by 2. If there's no remainder, it gives us a 0, which means it's an even number. If there's a remainder, it gives us an output of 1, which means it's an odd number. Well, this marks the end of this lesson, and I'll see you in the next lesson.